You remind me of this. I wrote in the book. I wrote a chapter on marketing and communication, and there's this one illustration I think about all the time, especially with mainline churches, because the mainline congregation specifically, there's two significant barriers to effective communication.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mainline Marketing Blueprint podcast. I am Larry Williams. We help mainline churches with their strategy and messaging to really be more effective in today's world. And I have a really awesome guest to have a really cool conversation. His name is Joe Graves, a pastor, entrepreneur, and consultant who is deeply committed to rethinking assumptions and opening up new possibilities for faith, leadership, and social impact. He's the founding pastor of Central City Church, now Cityview Church, and has been behind multiple impactful efforts like the Columbus Violence Reduction Fund, Little Bottoms Free Store, and the Ohio Writers Association. And Joe's work is grounded in justice, creativity, and compassion. And I'm honored to have him on the show. Hello, Joe, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks so much, Larry.
We are new friends, but I think we'll be pretty good friends by the end of this. So, Joe, again, thanks for joining us. I'd love to start with your journey. You've been involved in planting churches, starting nonprofits, and now you're also a consultant and author. What led you to this work, and what inspired you to write The Progressive Planter?
Yeah, no, I've been involved in ministry since I was in high school, and that's really where it all started. My brother, I'm one of 7 kids, and one of my brothers ended up kind of going down a pretty rough patch. He still loves to challenge authority, but he did it in an unhealthy way and ended up in prison. But he came out of prison and found I found that he had a 180. His life was completely changed. And I had always really been like a really good kid, and I just remember being really kind of almost competitive about that. I was like, something about him felt more Christian than me, which didn't make sense. I was like, why is he now? Something about him's more Christian than me, but I've always behaved. And of course, you almost have to go to seminary to learn that it's called grace. You shouldn't have to, but it was God's grace. And so he eventually was given a building to open a youth center. And that was really probably the first ministry I was a part of at the startup level. We had a building, we had a ping pong table, we had a pool table, we had some donated sound equipment, and we were opening a youth center in this tiny, small rural town in Northwest Ohio. That's literally called Hicksville, Ohio. That's a proper noun, not an adjective. And we did. And so in high school, me and my brothers opened a youth center, and instead of going to football games on Friday night, because that's what you do in small town Ohio, we were hanging out at the center with kids that nobody else wanted. And my brother's prayer, which has continued to be formative for me, based on his own experience, was like, hey, God, send us the kids no one else wants. So ever since then, I went on to Bible college at Taylor University, and then I started working in nonprofits, and I went to seminary, and I eventually became a pastor. All along the way, those early events of just wanting to create spaces for people that maybe don't fit in anywhere else, it still forms me. So that's where the journey began. But when I became a pastor, I was serving a traditional mainline church that was older. I was 24 at the time, but the average age of our congregation was 70. And there was not an interest in doing anything new. We actually launched a new service there, and this was pre-COVID. And I kind of had unhealthy expectations for myself, so I didn't think it was a success. Looking back, I'm like, man, I had 50 people in this contemporary service in a small town. Like, that was actually really good. Now I've written a book on church planting, and our average attendance is much more than that. So I didn't realize how meaningful it was, but I really kind of felt I was feeling this itch to create new spaces for people that can't connect to existing established congregations. And that led me down this trail of exploring church planting, but my heart was always in the streets as well. So my thought was, I talk about church planting, I talk about new nonprofit starts, and lot of people think those are different things. For me, they're the same. They kind of work in the same way. The principles that we use to plant a church was the same principles that we use to launch a free store that gives away diapers and wipes to families with children under the age of 3. And it's the same principles that I use for a non-religious organization when we helped it become a nonprofit, the Ohio Writers Association, where I still serve as the president. I mean, the principles are the same. And so I just love to, be able to create space for people, whether it's writers or whether it's families with infants or whether it's church members, just creating space for people. So we planted a church. It became self-sustaining about 2 years ago. We merged with another congregation. That's why our name changed. But in the process, we kind of inherited a forever home through that merger. We merged with an established church, St. Luke's UMC. And we developed a new name, but we had a home, we had staff, we had a board. We were a church. And then my wife started planting a second church. And she was doing things differently than we had done because we planted the first church together. She was doing a different kind of church, a network of micro churches. Wow. And she was starting that engine up again. It's a lot of work to do anything new. And I was shutting that engine down because our church that I was still pastoring was now sustainable. And being a pastor is hard, but it's a lot easier being a pastor of an established church when it reaches that stage than it is a church plant. So that's when I started writing. I love to write anyways, but I was really thinking through our journey and then thinking through how my wife was applying it in a completely different way. And so what are those deeper principles? And that's what I eventually wrote this book on church planting, especially church planting that's going to make the world a better place, that's justice oriented. And then I was so grateful when Abington from the United Methodist Publishing House picked it up, and it comes out this week. Wow. So that's the long story.
We'll definitely put that in the show notes. My next question is, I think the term progressive planter might throw some people off depending on their background. How do you define what that means? And what are some of the biggest misunderstandings or stereotypes that you run in when talking about progressive church work?
Yeah, progressive's a tricky word, and it's funny because I don't really use it a lot in the book. I actually went back and looked, and I'm like, I use it like 2 or 3 times. It is a book on progressive church planting, but what I mean by that is it's inclusive of LGBTQ. I don't even really make a case for it. It's just kind of assumed. There's plenty of other books that will build a theological case for that. This book's much more just practical. So it assumes that diversity, equity, inclusion is a good thing, which I know is controversial these days. It assumes that church hurt is real and that people have experienced it and we should try to avoid it. So there's some basic assumptions. I actually just wrote an article for Ministry Matters on what makes a church plant progressive. And I really kind of bulleted it down to like 3 big points. The first one is diversity, equity, inclusion. What does it mean to create space for everyone, regardless of their nationality, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their socioeconomic status, all of those buzzwords and identities. The other 2 that I think are really important to progressive Christians, which I have to also just preface that progressive Christianity is by definition a reaction to something. So one of the benefits, and labels are only useful as much as they're useful, right? So there's no perfect label, but just talking in broad strokes, the great thing about conservative or evangelical Christianity is everyone's on the same page. Like that's kind of part of the identity is you literally have a creed that says this is what we believe about really specific things, like daily life stuff. This is how you grow in your faith. All of these really specific things. Progressives by definition don't. And progressives, whether you're talking about progressives or ex-evangelicals or people who are deconstructing faith, all of these are processes, not identities. And so they're reacting to or moving from, they're progressing or they're deconstructing or they're ex-evangelical, so they're leaving. And so what I found is everyone does that in different ways. And progressives, I know progressive evangelicals who believe LGBTQ people should be in the church, but still want to have altar calls. I know progressives who think altar calls are manipulative. You know, it's
Yeah.
just like, I know progressives who are like, I want to lay hands on people and pray for them because I believe God can heal you. And I know progressives who are like, I don't believe in prayer anymore. So it's just like, there's no, so
Not a
all of that to
monolith.
say, it's not, it's even more, everything's nuanced, even in the conservative evangelical space. No one's the same, but it's even more so for progressive. So, but the big things that I've seen is invest in diversity, equity, inclusion, being honest about power and privilege. So who's in control, who gets to have the final say, who's on the board, who gets to be a pastor, who gets to have authority, and what does authority look like? And that plays out even in how we read scripture. Progressives tend to, I think, progressives view scripture, and this might be a misconception. I think many progressives have a really high view of scripture, but because they have a high view of scripture, they are very careful how they use it, very careful how they interpret it. They want the historical context. They want all the critical analysis because they don't want to misuse that of power and authority. So being honest about power and privilege. And then the last one is being a present-centered faith. There's a real tendency to push back against the idea that Christianity is just a ticket to heaven. There are some traditions that really focus on the afterlife and we're saving souls. And progressives can do that. That's still part of progressive circles, some progressive circles. But there is a more emphasis on bringing heaven to earth. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And that plays out in a lot of ways of just investing in justice and equity and poverty alleviation, like creation care. All of these things are rooted in the sense that, like, no, where we are right now matters and we should be investing in it. And there are people who are experiencing hell right now that we should be changing. So those are some of the things, but the reality is that labels are tricky. And I tell people, even with this book, it's a progressive church planting book, but it's almost more practical than progressive. And anyone could benefit from it. I mean, I hope that hate organizations don't buy it and use it, but the practices in there could be applied in any setting.
That's awesome. I really love that answer. I would say, in my experience in working with some mainline progressive denominations and churches, there's sort of I equivalate it to, and I'm not trying to be controversial, but like if we look at the Democratic Party today, right, the messaging is so it does not stick as easily as maybe the other side would, and it makes it where even if you have a better product, if your messaging isn't really connecting with people, there's going to be sort of a disinterest, right? And I think that's one of the difficulties from the left. But I would say even in terms of like a lot of progressive churches, I feel like when I see it, and I kind of have an outside view looking at it, I'm like, there's so many good things that even these smaller churches do that I don't see a lot of larger churches even doing. That they're consistently involved in their community, consistently doing so many different things. It's just it's not really known, or not really really well documented, so to speak, where people who would be interested in maybe joining your community don't really know who you are. It's not necessarily that you're they're against or don't want to join. They just don't really know where you are. In your opinion, what are some advantages or things that you think that mainline churches can do to be more visible in their community, or just things that they can do to really show like there is an alternative? Because like you said, there are many people who are disillusioned from church. A lot of people who have had really bad experiences in churches, but they don't know that there's an alternative, and there are some people who actually would join a church if they knew there was a church that would accept them. What would your thoughts be on that?
You know, you remind me of this. I wrote in the book. I wrote a chapter on marketing and communication, and there's this one illustration I think about all the time, especially with mainline churches, because the mainline congregation specifically, there's two significant barriers to effective communication.
Hey, Pastor, real quick, if your church website is getting a refresh this summer, don't forget one of the most important pieces, online giving. I highly recommend Tidely. It's simple, secure, and trusted by over 37,000 churches around the world. Tidely makes it incredibly easy to add giving buttons, mobile-friendly forms, and even recurring donation options, so your members can stay engaged no matter where they are. If you're ready to make generosity easier for your church family, head over to the link in the show notes and check out Tidely today.
The first one is mainline denominations view themselves as a sinking ship, and so people are trying to figure out how to survive. There's this, what that does is it produces an immense amount of scarcity mindset of like holding on to what you have and holding it tighter and trying to like keep the boat afloat. And so the idea that you would think beyond to connect with new people becomes hard because you're so consumed with just holding everything together because you feel like it's all dying. And the reality is there's significant decline and all this sort of stuff. But it produces scarcity mindset, which, you know, when you think about communication, the way we view ourselves is often how we communicate ourselves. And so when our marketing is rooted in scarcity mindset, it becomes really ineffective.
Yeah.
And that not just in how we talk about ourselves on our website or social media, but like our willingness to even invest in those things.
Right.
Like when you're in scarcity mindset and you're not sure how to pay your pastor's salary, you can't get that board to invest $5,000 in marketing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's what they need to reach new people to eventually be healthy. But when you're in that scarcity mindset, so that's a huge, huge barrier. The second one, though, is mainline progressives, not just mainline. So ex-evangelicals, deconstructing Christians, progressive Christians, which not all mainline denominations are progressive, but progressive Christians are reacting to something, and it's really, really easy to be cynical. And I think there's plenty of, I'm not anti-cynical. I think there's lots of room for critique. I think we as people need to practice lament. There's some really great books out there about racial justice and lament, and all of that's really important to me. But when it comes to inviting people to be a part of your church, that cynicism can make it really hard because, as you said, it becomes a less cohesive message. The message isn't about what you bring to the world, the good that you can do. It becomes more about what you don't like. And that's, I think, just a less compelling message. So I talk about this a little bit. And one of the examples I give is, you know, churches are, I think, often very insecure, and I think pastors are as well. And I'll speak for myself. I'm very insecure. And so I don't want to advertise myself as a small church. We are a small church. So I'll just say that.
Yeah.
I've done the work. I've seen the therapist, you know, like we're a small church. We're not even a medium-sized church. We're a small church. And I mean that not as a negative, because who said small is bad?
Exactly.
But in previous iterations of my life and in many other churches, small is viewed as bad. And so people on their website will say, we're a growing church, which is a code word for we're smaller than we want to be. And I just say, no, like, be honest about who you are, and don't let an honest description of who you are be viewed negatively.
Yeah.
Embrace it. Because here's what I found, and I found it, and this was a hard pill for me to swallow. There are people in our city looking for a small church.
Yeah.
As you said, they've been burned by the mega church, by the big box church, by the light show. They still want quality music. They still want quality children's ministry. You know, they want like a good experience, but they don't want to get lost in a crowd.
Yeah.
And not everyone wants that. But as soon as I started just being honest about who we are on our website and said things like, hey, we're a small community, or, you know, all this sort of stuff, then people looking for that can find us in the search algorithm gods will let us be found or whatever. And so I think some of it's just being honest, but then also making sure that it's positive. And how do we word who we are in a positive way without thinking less of ourselves? It's tough.
I have there's so many thoughts, and I realized this conversation, it was not going to be as structured but I think it's awesome. So I have several thoughts on that. So I'm in the Atlanta metro area, right, where there's literally churches everywhere.
Yep.
Okay. Every type of church, everything. It is just like the church heavens. Everywhere is just a church. Here, there, everywhere. I've been to a mega church here in Atlanta. Great preacher, just amazing communicator, all the bells and whistles, all of the stuff. I watched him online. I really connected with his message. So we went, and I'm like, I will never meet him.
No. His bodyguards won't let you.
I will never meet him in my life. And the only way that I can potentially, have any level of access is going through all of the layers of, you join, you have to go through the new members, and then you got to become a volunteer. And just maybe he might know you. But when I think back to, because I actually did not grow up in a particularly religious home or anything along those lines. I actually didn't really get into church at all until I got to college in Tampa. And somebody ended up inviting me to a church. And it was a pretty small church, 100 members, etc. Very tight-knit community. Connected with the pastor pretty well. I kind of joined that church. That was sort of where a lot of my faith sort of was formed in that community. I became involved in ministry really right away. I was able to participate in just about anything that I wanted to. I was able to explore different options. The pastor came to my house multiple times. The pastor married me in a different country. The pastor's wife came to see my baby when she was born, was there with my wife. So there's no way he could have done that if we were one of these mega churches.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, pastors still feel that need to become big.
Yeah.
Because you might get a bigger salary, but beyond that, the stress level of being able to run one of those mega ministries and all of the things that come along with it. It's just is that a real trade-off when compared to you really know the people that you're in community with, you're able to have real relationships with them, make a real impact. I feel like, to me, that's a better way of doing it. But we've been sold this idea that bigger is better.
Absolutely. Well, and that's American consumerism and the industrialized world. No, Carey Nieuwhof just posted recently about how too many pastors are chasing platforms instead of people. And he was just talking about that very thing. I thought it was ironic coming from somebody who used to be a pastor and now runs a platform. Yeah. So I'll just state that. This is funny to me. No, I'm a fan, but I just think that's funny. But he's right. There's this pressure to develop social media platforms, website platforms, speaking platforms, instead of just being pastors, kind of shepherds, and knowing your people. And what we saw in the work of Jesus, and this is at the heart of church planning. I don't care what kind of platform you have. I know some church planners who have pretty big digital platforms, like 50,000 followers on Instagram, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that doesn't matter. When it comes down to it, and you talk to them, church planning is all about getting to know people and inviting them to be a part of what God is doing in your community. That's what it is. It's not anything else. Marketing is a part of that. Communication is a part of it. But ultimately, it's the work of Jesus, where he is finding people, usually finding people like Jesus gives us a really good example, not the religious people. Yeah. Like if they've got too much religious education, probably not good for a church plant, because they have all these opinions and ideas. And this is what I try to tell people. This is one of the struggles of an established church relaunching, is if you just have established, well indoctrinated religious people, it's really hard for them to reimagine what church can be. And that's why revitalization is, I think, harder than church planting. But if you're planting a church and you're following the model of Jesus, where he's just going out and instead of inviting the religious leaders, he's inviting the fishermen and the tax collectors to be a part of his community. And he's spending a couple of years investing in them, getting to know them, gathering people, pushing back against the crowds and really focusing on those 12 and then probably the 70 that were kind of walking with them and really investing in them. That's what made his launch day so successful at Pentecost, was all of those years investing and helping them and learn what it meant to be the church. And so regardless of how big your platform is, if you want to build a community of people, it's going to be about getting to know real people, meeting with them and asking them to come and be a part of what you're doing, and then investing time with them. It's not anything else. Anything else and it doesn't work. And I'm really skeptical, actually. I think there's a lot of really interesting online church models, and I'm not against online church. But if the online church model is one way, one-sided, in other words, I'm creating content and I'm counting the number of views or watches as attendance, I'm like, it only becomes a church when they can react to that, when there's a two-way street. So is there Zoom calls?
Not to mention the bots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it has to be and it can be done digitally. I know some people who do online ministry where they use a lot of Zoom calls and things like that. So they're actually building community. They're building relationships with people across the country or even around the world. I mean, I run a writers association, and we've built some pretty cool communities, and it's people from all over Ohio and all over the United States, and even sometimes parts of the other world. Yeah. But it's because we're showing up in person and interacting and giving peer critique. If it was just us putting out content and people, it wouldn't be a community. And so I think whether it's online or in person, it doesn't matter. It comes down to that. Are you interacting with people? And that's when it comes to marketing. Like if you're a small church and you can get to know the pastor and the pastor wants to get lunch with you, I mean, tell people that, because there's people who are looking for that.
Absolutely.
Like put it on your website and say, hey, our pastor would love to grab lunch with you or coffee, Mm-hmm. And then people, if somebody's looking for that, because that's what I think marketing is, and I'd be curious your thoughts. But ethical marketing for me is not trying to bait and switch somebody or convince them to be a part of something. It's about being positive and honest about who you are so that people can decide for themselves whether it makes sense to be a part of it. And so the more you can share about yourself and your community that's honest and positive, so people can be like, oh yeah, I would love to be a part of a church like that.
Absolutely. That is like 120% my philosophy when it comes to marketing, like as authentic as humanly possible, connecting with people. And there are strategies to do that, right? Like there are ways you can pray for people through that and really connect. Like the thing that is so critical, I think, about 2025, right, is people are super lonely. Like it's an epidemic, right, of loneliness. Yep. That people really are looking for community. So I think that for churches to really not, and I think sometimes too, churches may have a bad understanding of what church marketing is, right? Where I'm not trying to just make your church look like something it's not. I want to present it in its most authentic way and find people who would resonate with that and that are looking for that. So I think that is a really big deal. It's funny too. I just saw, like, I literally right before coming on here, I saw a post from Mark Cuban, and he said, with the rise of AI and the way that it's going, people are not going to know the difference between real and fake. Like they're literally not, which will make in person so much more important.
Yeah.
Like it's going to become so, you're not going to have a clue whether or not something is real or fake. So in person is going to become, and he was talking from a business perspective, like, you know, being in person, doing conferences, all those different things. But like 20 times more is that relevant for churches. Like you have to be in person, and you have to really be in people's lives in order for it to be true. Like you can't rely on it on internet completely. Like it's a great first step because that's where attention is, but it can't be like that can't be where it's left.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I think it's so important. Absolutely.
Awesome. Let's that was a really big dissection. Let's talk about challenges. what are some of the most common hurdles you've seen progressive church planters face today, especially in the mainline context? We've talked a little bit about it, but what are some other like real common challenges?
Well, I think in general, everything from overcoming the scarcity mindset. There's a major denomination that just shut down all of its church planting because it decided it could no longer afford it. And of course, friends who I know in that denomination are like, how can we afford not to if we're declining? But they say they're going to reinvent it. I don't know what that'll look like, and I imagine they will, but they kind of shut down what they're currently doing around church planting because they had to cut their budget as a denomination. So that scarcity mindset is a huge barrier to mainline. I think the lack of a cohesive voice, ex-evangelicals are so diverse because we all deconstruct in different ways. And I'm mainline, but I also was more so raised in the evangelical space. So I identify really closely with ex-evangelical and a lot of people in our church. And I mean, we hold on to certain theologies and we take them with us, and then we let go of some. And some people deconstruct to the point of not even believing in God in others, and others just deconstruct to the point where they think women should be pastors again. And so how do you build community with people who are on different places around doctrine and theology? Like, they all have different views. I think that's a real challenge. But the big challenge is everything from marketing to evangelism. And what does it mean to connect with new people? I think in progressive spaces, specifically because of the history of fire and brimstone evangelism, because of the history of colonization, and other forms of forced Christianity, and it's a nasty history. Everything from the Crusades to American slavery to Native American history, all of this is like really horrible things that people did in the name of Jesus and in the name of evangelism. All the way up to modern day, where people I know who are part of various campus ministries that was doing like the whole, if you died today, do you know where you would go? Questions to strangers, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So all of this history and baggage around evangelism has resulted in people who deconstruct embracing an attitude of, not only am I not going to invite someone to church, but I'm not sure I want them to know I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge barrier to planting churches, because the only way to connect with new people is to have people who are excited and want to invite people, it has to grow. And so I think for me, a lot of focus is I've been a lot of energy into trying to figure out how we can reclaim evangelism and how we can think about, and this applies to marketing too, but what does it mean to be okay viewing myself as a Christian first off? Like, that's one of the first steps. Like, I don't have to think less of myself. There's a lot of people who think who are ashamed of Christianity. And I think even ashamed that they're ashamed of Christianity, because for the evangelical people, we were drilled into us that if you are ashamed of Jesus, Jesus would be ashamed of you.
Right.
And that's serious shame in and of itself. And I've tried, I just talked about this a couple weeks ago. I said, look, I'm not ashamed of Jesus, and I'm not ashamed of God. I think they're both doing just fine. I think they're doing, like, I think Jesus did all right. And I think I like what Jesus did, but I am ashamed of Christianity at times. And I have to process that. And I have to realize for myself, and I think for other progressives, I have to realize that the ways in which Christianity has been weaponized in the past and in the present, I have to recognize that people are smart enough to separate the radical forms of Christianity from the ways in which I'm trying to practice it. And I have to trust people to know that I'm a Christian, but not like that. And I think I can trust people to do that. I would do that for others. I know there are radical forms of every religion, and I would never judge someone based on the radical forms of their religion. I would judge them based on my relationship with them.
Right.
And so I have to trust other people will do that with me. That, like, yeah, there are crazy Christians out there, white nationalists, everything else. But if you get to know me, you'll know. And so if I can help people move in that direction, that opens the door for sharing my faith and inviting people to be a part. of a faith community. But until we do that, that's a big barrier for progressive Christians. When you are uncomfortable with the idea of proselytizing, evangelism, even talking about your faith, it's really hard to invite people to be a part of a church.
Do you feel pressure to speak out against unhealthy forms of Christianity and really because that's one big thing that I think a lot of people have an issue with is just the fact that there's really a lack of accountability in a lot of spaces. And, there's a lot of people who do things that are really crazy. And you're like, how in the world is that going on? Do you kind of feel like a prophetic calling to speak out against some of those forms of injustice?
Yeah, two parts there. I think I have to recognize the fact that I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
And so when I enter spaces, people are going to think certain things about me, and that doesn't have anything to do with me. But to get defensive about that is just to strengthen their opinions about pastors.
Yeah.
So not only do I feel like I should speak out against unhealthy practices of Christianity, but I have to apologize on behalf of the pastors who've hurt people. Not because I've done it, but I'm apologizing because of my role. I think of the story in Donald Miller's book, Blue Like Jazz, where they set up a confessional booth, and then instead of taking people's confessions, they confess the sins of the church. That's a really important practice for people who are trying to change and trying to help.
Hey Pastor, if you're building or refreshing your church website, you'll need reliable hosting. I recommend Bluehost. It's simple to use, affordable, and works great with WordPress. It's what I suggest to every church that wants to build a strong online presence without all the tech headaches. You can check it out through my link in the description. It helps support this channel and gives you a discount as well. Check it out, and let's make your digital front door strong, fast, and welcoming. God bless.
People heal. It's like, hey, as a pastor, I'm sorry that other pastors have hurt you, and just being able to say that. And then also speaking out. And I'll throw, one of the things that's great about a healthy mainline denomination, and every mainline denomination is different. But one of the things that I love about the United Methodist Church is we have structures of accountability. Mm-hmm. When complaints are filed against pastors, there's an equitable process.
Yeah.
When pastors do things that are illegal, the police are involved immediately. Mm-hmm. We do not handle it in-house. When the complaints aren't illegal and they're more interpersonal, there's a process and I've been a part of this process in the past, and it honors both sides. It's equitable and it's intentional, and there are layers of accountability. And that's one of the things that keeps me in the mainline church. Because if you're an evangelical pastor or non-denominational, people just love people I don't want to be a part of it. Like, denominations were really out of favor for a while there. And, I grew up in a world where everyone had to be non-denominational. I'm non-denominational, because it's less divisive. And I'm just like, when I got older, I'm like, that just means that you can do whatever you want and no one's going to hold you accountable. And we're consistently seeing the stories show up. I mean, every couple months, another story of either a pastor or a CCM artist or somebody from that world. You find out that they were doing horrible things and there was no accountability. So I'm like, you know what? There are a lot of things that annoy me about mainline denominations. One of the things I'm grateful for is I'm required to go to boundaries training to learn about healthy boundaries, ethical boundaries with my parishioners. Every couple of years, I'm required to get a seminary education. I have district superintendents and bishops that I'm responsible to, that if members of my congregation have a problem with me, they have a process in which they can file a complaint against me and it will be looked into.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that. I think that's really good. And I think we need more of that. And so I think mainline churches, that goes back to there's a lot, it's easy for us to be negative towards ourselves, but I mean, that's like a selling point for me, especially in the world we live in. It's a major selling point.
Speaking of that, I want to touch on that for a second. That's a great point, but I feel like there are some unique qualities that mainline churches have that you won't find in other denominations. What's another one that you could say, we don't have everything, but there's some unique qualities that people would actually resonate with. Can you think of anything else that kind of comes to mind in that regard?
There's two. One that come to mind, right? There's lots of answers to that, but there's two that come to mind. One is for all the pastors listening, and the other one's for all the church members. So as a pastor, because there's pros and cons to everything, but I'll tell you the pros, and maybe another conversation I'll tell you the cons. But as a denomination that believes in equity, my local church can't just pay me whatever they want. I have minimum salaries. I have a pension, which means I can retire someday. And I have health insurance. And I am grateful for that. I know that if something happens to me, which I'm looking at back surgery, actually, I know that I'm not going to go bankrupt because I have health insurance that, once I reach my ridiculously high, health insurance is still a scam, don't get me wrong, but I have it, and I have a retirement pension, and I have minimum salaries that churches have to pay. And that's part of the collective impact of community organizing, right? So we're all together and we vote on these things. And so I have protections. Now, that can be abused, but that's a different conversation. I'm really grateful for that. Yeah. And there's a lot of churches that don't have that. They're at the will of whatever their local nonprofit, non-denominational churches, whatever the board wants to pay you. Yeah. If you don't like it, you can leave. My churches, they don't get to decide that. We decide it collectively. We vote on it. We're very democratic. The second thing that in the United Methodist Church specifically is because we are able to pool all of our resources, we can have a huge impact. So one thing that people don't know is that one of the first agencies to show up in a disaster is the United Methodist Committee on Relief, UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. And they show up almost before any agency, and they're there longer than any agency. Mm-hmm. Around the world, in the United States, there's a hurricane, there's a tornado, they're there. And you're like, how do I not know this? Well, because we don't have to spend any money on marketing. We don't have to advertise and tell you to donate to UMCOR because our denomination fronts the bill. Oh, wow. Our churches give through connectional giving. That eventually makes its way up to the general board, and then they have money to respond to relief. And so 100% of it goes to relief. So the fact that you don't know about it is a testament to how effective it is because they're not spending money on marketing. Not that there's anything wrong with spending money on marketing, but when you're doing relief, it's just a fun little story because people don't know about it, but that's the benefit of being a part of a denomination, really able to significantly impact. So when you think about even investments, our denomination invests, our conference invests. Our pension plan is an investment. That's what pension and retirement is, right? Yeah. You're putting money into something, and that's usually tied up in various investments. Well, as a conference, we can vote on certain companies not to invest in. So when there's a company that's actively participating in genocide or human trafficking or exploiting workers or refusing to invest in clean energy or whatever, our conference can say, hey, we're not going to invest in those companies. And then our pension managers will make sure that the money doesn't go there. And it isn't just one person's money. It's an entire conference representing millions of dollars that's now not being invested in companies unless they're willing to change their mind. And so there's significant influence there that you would not have at a local non-denominational level. Wow. And we've actually seen changes because of that investment. We've seen changes in policies at Walmart and other big companies because of our pressure around whether we'll invest in them or not. So, that's the type of social change you can't do at a local level, but you can do when you're working together with other million United Methodists or whatever. You're
talking a lot about United Methodism, and I briefly, everyone that's in the United Methodist knows kind of how these last few years have gone. Right. With the conference and the split and all of those different things. How has that been on your end? Because I'm sure you've had friends who may have gone to the other organization and things of that. How has that been just from your end dealing with that?
The United Methodist Church, like any mainline denomination, has been debating the inclusion of LGBTQ people for years. I think we've been debating it since the 60s or 70s. And I've been a part of the United Methodist Church as a pastor since 2011. So I've been to many conferences, and the debating and the disagreement and the hate, the ways in which people disagree. It's one thing to disagree. It's another thing to do it in like a really violent way.
Yeah.
That was really tough. So right now, I don't know. I heard someone talk about it as a divorce, and sometimes it's just best for people to get divorced. Then you can just be who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably how I feel, is you guys were not getting along. My parents were not getting along. They're arguing every time they were together. And now they can just live the way that makes sense for them peacefully. And there's peace. And so at the last annual conference, the whole tone was different because I stayed United Methodist. And then, I absolutely lost friends who've gone to be global United Methodist. And a lot of friends and colleagues went that way. And I had kind of lost touch with them already, but I think about them and I actually, want to reach out and find out how things are going and whatnot. But when I gathered just with who stayed United Methodist, the whole tone was different. There wasn't that arguing. There wasn't that violence. It just felt more unified, and that we could move forward and make agreements and move forward as a church. So I think it's been a good thing, at least for the United Methodist Church, but it's absolutely been painful for many reasons, for many people involved in that process. But yeah,
I can tell a story discreetly. I was working with a UMC church in Pennsylvania, and actually still am. And they decided to stay. And one of the pastors that I had like direct connection with was like, I'm not going to stay. I'm not going to. So like he like ended up going to another church, and it was like kind of crazy. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is really divisive. But I think to what you said, when you just can agree that you can't agree to disagree, sometimes that might be the best choice overall. I have so many other questions, but we don't have that much time, and I'm honored to have you on. Just in general, can you let people know where they can find you and just how they can come in contact with you? I know you have a lot going on, but what's the best way that people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to joegraves.org. That's my website. You can also check out our church's website, cityviewcolumbus.org. But yeah, go to joegraves.org or find me on Facebook as well and Instagram. Both of those are on my website as well, and love to have you join the conversation as we try to imagine the future of the church that's going to actually make the world a better place.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. This is the Mainline Marketing Blueprint podcast. And this is Joe Graves. And hopefully we can have him on to have more fun conversations. God bless you guys. And we'll see you next time.